I would say there's something, innate in some individuals that gives them a kind of sense of wit, or punchiness in terms, I mean, just by nature, you can tell some people you walk up and they always, um, they know how to, you know, be concise with a conversation basically by, delivering a word or two and everybody knows exactly what they're saying. I mean, you're one of those kinds of characters. But is there some way that a person can kind of develop a sense of that internal dialogue, kind of what you're describing with the character, where you're using the thoughts that they have rather than the words that they would say to kind of help the actor kind of grab on to what they need to be in that scene, in that moment, and that sense of wit,
Mm,
because it's sort of like those witty, quick thoughts you'd have if someone's being really rude to you in a bar, and you're going through those things. They're not
yeah.
things you're saying. Some people are really good at that and some aren't, but is there a honing of that you can do through reading maybe more scripts and kind of getting a sense of style that way?
Rage. Rage will get you there every time. Sense of injustice will get you there every time. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. It's read everything, because when you read everything, and I don't just mean screenplays. Definitely read a lot of screenplays. In fact, you should have a depository of your favorite screenplays ever. Every time you read a screenplay that makes you go, "Whoa! I really felt that. That really jumped off the page. It's well executed on the page." Then keep it in your magic box. And on the days when you're having a bit of a meh day, take them out, leave them on screen, and when you can't write, just read a page of it. I swear to God, it's fuel for inspiration. But reading a lot of screenplays and reading a lot of Stephen King or whatever will gives you permission. It shows you what's possible, and it shows you what it feels like when it's done well, and it gives you permission to do it yourself also. But that's the thing about reading a lot of screenplay books, is that suddenly you feel paralyzed. It's analysis paralysis. There's too much going on, and then you don't know what to do. Your first execution really should be just splash it on the page, vomit it on the page, see what it looks like, and then start growing it a little bit. Because some processes are different from individuals. I tend to outline, and at some point I'm like, I can't outline anymore. I have to start writing, and then I start writing. When I get a little bit stuck on it, I go back to the outline, and plug in that third act kind of black hole that was there, because sometimes writing specifics makes me think about the general idea. And what's possible, and suddenly I go, oh, I didn't think about this, but now that I've written the scene, that tells me that I have to plant this thing in the third act, which I hadn't seen before. So it's kind of a macro micro kind of relationship. But to answer your question, because I've just gone on an ADHD tantrum, a tangent, I should say,
All good.
is is read absolutely everything. This is what the 50th draft is for, by the way.
Mhm.
Is put the first couple of drafts down, stick it in a drawer, move on to a new story, and then get lost in that world, and then come back to project number one. Because now you're fresh. You're not thinking about all the details and all the technical stuff that you want to execute. You're just looking at the page, and listen to what your inner voice says. If your inner voice is taking the piss, or says that's a bit shit, or that's a bit that, put it in. If you give your draft to somebody and the person says, whoa, this plot point is completely unplausible, right?
Mhm.
Write it down. Write what they've just said, stick it in the script. Because they're capturing the audience point of view. And if you put it in the script, you covered that ground already. So people will accept the plot hole a lot more, because somebody has shouted foul on it, and
Mhm.
you've written it in the screenplay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying.
It depends what you're writing, of course
Yeah,
it does. Um, but sometimes when I hear objections, I listen to people and I go, yeah, I'm going to include that.
yeah,
It
yeah.
covers the argument.
Well, I guess it's part of using the unexpected a little bit, that
Yeah.
makes things a bit more exciting, and
Yeah,
that external input
yeah.
helps you find where that is.
And we're so sensitive about it also. I'm incredibly sensitive to criticism anyway, of any kind. So when somebody criticizes the writing, I'm like, oh, you're dead to me. Our friendship is dead to me. And then I walk away 2 days later, I'm like, they did have a point.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to include it. Now you're my best friend ever. Of course you are.
Yeah, I
Excuse
find
me.
the same. I'm getting maybe a little better at it. But I say that, and then 5 minutes later, I take it back. But yeah, the criticism is something that at first you feel like a brick wall about it, and then after it marinates for a while, you strip your ego out of it a little bit. You start to pick away at what points are actually quite valid, in those things. I
Yeah.
do struggle with the timing of that sometimes. But yeah, yeah.
I think something else that the writers don't do, at least young writers, is that again, reading too many screenwriting books, well, will do this to you, is that the main character has to be sympathetic and has to be brilliant, and then you end up writing something that's incredibly dull for everyone because the character is too good. What they really mean to say is you can write about bastards. In fact, you should. But they need to be understandable. So you can have it like a vile human being, but if you understand why, you're interested, you're invested. I mean, look at Netflix. Jesus, half the stuff on Netflix is about vile characters, but man, are we absolutely fascinated by it. And not necessarily because the deeds they do, but it's because the psychology of being a bad person is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to have. In fact, you should have incredibly flawed characters. In fact, everything that we do, Sebastian, everything about storytelling does one thing, and it's to correct an individual's flaw. So the backstory is all about creating a flaw in a character, a belief system, a trauma, and then the rest of the story is either to reinforce that or try to break it, try to change it. So if you have somebody like Braveheart who is steadfast in his mission that I have to do this, then it becomes a test of commitment, and the entire story structure then converges on him and tries to make him change his mind, either through violence or through bribery. Or you have somebody like Liar Liar who absolutely has to change because every time he lies, he hurts somebody, and then it becomes a test of commitment to his flaw. He doesn't want to let go of his flaw, right? But the story is saying you must do this for this to work. And when you start seeing story like that, it's a lot of fun. Do not be afraid to write about bad people.
Mhm.
Because it's not where you begin, but it's where you end up in the story and the values that you attribute at the end of the story that will redeem all of this. If that's where you're going, by the way. If you're doing something like Joker, where you have an individual who it gets kicked everywhere he goes, and he keeps saying, "Why can't people just be nice to each other?" And then flips his top at the end and shoots people.
Right.
You go, oh shit, we did this. By the
Yeah.
way, we did this. That was such an interesting structure, by the way, where you're following a character and you kind of know where it's going. And then when you reach that point, you're like, yeah, do it. Pull the trigger. Like, then you're like, what am I saying?
Mhm. Yeah. You're
Just
going along for the
no.
ride. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a beautiful trick of pulling you in and massaging that kind of theme into it,
Mhm.
which I thought was really well executed. Very much so.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think I don't know if there's a kind of psychological reaching that people do into, obviously foreign territory because not everyone's a psychopath, but they write some pretty intriguing stories about them. But I think there's always like an element of well, you have to understand the struggle, even if it's in a totally different context, when it comes to sadness and anger and rage and all of those things, because
Yeah.
I find that the best material, or at least, from my biased position that I've written, has come from um, at least creating metaphors out of my own struggles, my own challenges, and then I'm putting my, in a sense, my flaws on the page as well as my strengths, or how am I going to, like you said, you're trying to solve that gap in your life, or that flaw that you have, or work through that somehow, and that puts a kind of honesty into the story. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean it's a direct reflection of your experience,
Yeah.
but it could be just it flipped into an entire fantasy metaphor, whether it's from the rocks on the ground to the character that's approaching you, but they represent something of your own experience that you're honestly putting on the page.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of courage to do that. I've discovered over the years that when you write somebody who's not great, and then people immediately assume this is your belief system, and you go, no, incredible. I mean, maybe part of it is me. I absolutely agree with that. It doesn't mean that I uphold those bad values. It just means I find it quite funny to put it on the page. in this context. It doesn't mean I believe it. It just it works for this story in this context. But yeah, I wish people would do that a bit more because it shines a light on us.